Hello everyone, and welcome to World War II at 80. I'm Ron May, your host, author, historian, and speaker on World War II history and the stories of those who served. We continue with our 20th episode today, focusing on the events and stories of August 1945. The month of August began with a somber reminder of the war that continued in the Pacific Theater. "No fun to reach 18 now" was one of the headlines in the August 1st edition of the Martinsville, Indiana's Daily Reporter. The article noted that there were 11 Morgan County young men who reached that age in July and now would be eligible for military service. "There isn't the old pleasure and joy now for boys to reach the age of 18, the article writer stated. Once the boys reached that edge of maturity, they felt they were ready to reach out and grab the world by the tail. Now, when they reach 18, it carried with it only the privilege of reaching for a Jap." The August 3rd edition of the paper added to the gloomy prospect for those young men, as the headline read, "Roll of Honor is prepared," announcing the preparation for an official listing of former Martinsville High School boys who had been killed or were missing in action. The worst news of projected casualties, however, was known only by top military and government leaders who were preparing for the scheduled November amphibious invasion on mainland Japan. Japan had been planning for such an attack on their homeland. Back on April 8, 1945, with U.S. forces steadily closing in on mainland Japan, the Japanese Imperial General Headquarters issued a directive called Operation Ketsugo, meaning decisive. It was the military plan for the defense of their homeland. In addition to using over 4 million military forces, the Japanese government also planned to recruit civilians as volunteer fighters, 28 million of them. Given the name Kokumin Gayu Sentotai, which means Volunteer Fighting Corps, the civilian militia was to consist of males from the ages of 15 to 60 and females between 17 to 40. They were to be a second line of defense against invading U.S. forces. Firearms and ammunition being in short supply, combat training for the civilian militia consisted of swords or bamboo spears. Japan was ready to sacrifice all, even their women, children, and elderly, in opposing the American armed forces and saving their sense of national honor. The United States military leaders were not unaware of these buildup plans for the defense of Japan's homeland. Operation Downfall was the codename given for the planned two-stage invasion of Japan. It was to begin in November 1945 with the capture of Kyushu, Japan's southernmost island, in an operation called Olympic. That was to be followed in March 1946 with the invasion of the main island of Honshu in Operation Coronet. U.S. military leaders planned on using 5 million forces for the operations. It was to be the largest amphibious operation in history. Given the fanatical fighting spirit of the Japanese forces and civilians that were willing to fight to the death for protecting their homeland, the projected American casualties went as high as 1 million people. It was a staggering sacrifice of military forces to consider. American government leaders and the military high command dreaded the upcoming campaigns, but they saw no other way to defeat Japan but to go through with the operations. But then something happened on July 16, 1945, in the desert of Alamogordo, New Mexico. The first atomic bomb was successfully detonated and its devastating effects measured in what became known as the Trinity Test. The project to build such a bomb, codenamed the Manhattan Project, had begun in 1940 when President Roosevelt had commissioned a team of scientists to research and build an atomic bomb. He later approved the atomic program on October 9, 1941. The initial funding of $6,000 had grown to over $2 billion by mid-1945. But no one knew if or when such a bomb would be ready. Following the July 16, 1945 test, a handful of scientists, under the leadership of Robert Oppenheimer and the oversight of General Leslie Groves in New Mexico, knew those answers. And one day later, so did Harry Truman. Truman, the former vice president, had taken over as president after Roosevelt's death from a cerebral hemorrhage on April 12th. It was only after being sworn in as president that Truman learned of the secret project to build an atomic bomb, and he was willing to use it to shorten the war. On August 6th, a B-29 plane named the Enola Gay left the airstrip from Tinian Island with the atomic bomb called Little Boy. The bomber was flown by Colonel Paul Tibbets. At 8:15 a.m. local time, the bombardier on the Enola Gay dropped the first atomic bomb over the city of Hiroshima, killing between 70 and 80,000 Japanese and wounding nearly the same number. The bomb destroyed almost 5 square miles of the city. Yet even after the devastation of Hiroshima, Japan still refused to surrender. Here is a brief video clip of the bomb being dropped over Hiroshima.
At 8:15, a weather plane reports from Hiroshima that conditions are good. 2/10 lower and middle, and 2/10 at 15,000 feet. As they approach the target area, the weapon is checked for the last time. At 9:11, 31,000 feet over Hiroshima, the Enola Gay begins the bomb run. At 9:15, the bomb is dropped. The aircraft banks away at high speed. Just 50 seconds later, 15 miles from ground zero, the Enola Gay is rocked by the blast.
On August 9th, another B-29 bomber, this one named Boxcar, departed Tinian under the control of Major Charles Sweeney. At 11:01 a.m., the bombardier released the atomic bomb named Fat Man over the city of Nagasaki, killing between 35,000 and 40,000 people and injuring another 60,000. Thousands more Japanese died in Hiroshima and Nagasaki in the days and weeks that followed from the effects of radiation poisoning. The devastation of both bombs, the recent entrance of the Soviet Red Army into Manchuria, and the increasing food shortage crisis finally convinced Japan's Emperor Hirohito to accept defeat and seek an end to the war. On August 14th, Emperor Hirohito gave a radio address to the nation of Japan, declaring a surrender that all citizens would have to endure. At 7 p.m. on Tuesday, August 14th, newspaper reporters crowded into the White House to hear President Truman announce that Japan had officially surrendered. The news quickly spread via radio across the nation and headlines in newspapers the next day. Spontaneous celebration gatherings erupted across the country. Headlines in every U.S. newspaper carried the news of Japan's surrender. On August 15th, the day after the surrender of Japan was announced, the downtown square in Martinsville, Indiana, was overrun with people taking to the streets in a triumphant parade, celebrating the end of the war. Veterans organizations, service clubs, and the high school band took part in the procession. Cars and trucks filled with passengers kept driving loops around the square, honking their horns in celebration. Among those who took note of the celebration in Martinsville was one John T. Yeager of Mooresville, a resident of Morgan County for 90 of the over 100 years of his life. He was spending the week in Martinsville at the home of a local minister while his daughter was away. Yeager, who was nearing the age of 101, had lived through end-of-war celebrations before. His first experience was the end of the Civil War in 1865 when he was 20. That was followed by the end of the Spanish-American War in 1902 when he was 57. In 1918, he witnessed the conclusion of a war which was to end all wars, World War I. He was 73 at that time. Now, at the age of 100, he marked his fourth end-of-war celebration. Few had seen as many starts and ends to wars as Yeager. For all the celebrating in Martinsville, Indiana, and throughout the United States, some of the earliest and perhaps most meaningful celebrations took place in the Pacific Theater, close to the action. On August 14th, Sergeant John Jack Spaulding witnessed Navy ships celebrating victory over Japan on the waters off the coast of Okinawa. Spaulding was an Army Air Force electronic man serving with the 311th Fighter Squadron on Okinawa. Following the announcement of Japan's surrender, he observed the thunderous and bright celebration of Allied warships firing their guns into the evening sky and shining their searchlights to the heavens. Reflecting on the event 50 years later, in a 1995 article in the Martinsville Reporter-Times, he said, "I would estimate that there were almost 1,000 ships in the harbor. They were all loaded with readiness for the invasion. The effects of the guns firing in celebration riddled all our tents with holes as the flak was falling on us like rain. We had to call a red alert to stop the guns." End of quote. Spaulding didn't just see the celebration, he felt it. A piece of the burning hot shrapnel descending from the sky dropped into the opening of his shirt. "But I couldn't collect a Purple Heart for it," he said with a touch of humor. Perhaps no one was happier over Japan's surrender than Bart Hahn. A Peru, Indiana native, Hahn joined the Army Air Forces in 1942 after graduating from Muncie High School and Ball State University. In late 1944, he volunteered to go to China to aid the Nationalist Army in their fight against the Japanese by flying in vital supplies on a C-46 cargo plane. That meant flying over the towering and very dangerous Himalaya mountain region known as the Hump. Flying for the China National Air Corporation, Hahn flew a staggering 110 supply missions over the Hump during the first 8 months in 1945. Many planes and crews didn't survive the flight over the highest peaks in the world due to the high elevation, sudden storms, and high-velocity winds, as well as mechanical failures. During the war, over 600 planes went down over the Himalayas and took the lives of over 1,500 pilots and crew. Japan's surrender brought an end to those dangerous supply missions. By mid-August, the war was finally over. But the official surrender ceremony for Japan and the U.S. occupation duty that followed was still to come. And that will be the subject for our next episode. Learn more about World War II history during 1945 and the stories of those who served in my World War II trilogy, Our Service, Our Stories, Volumes 1, 2, and 3. The books are available for purchase on my website, ronaldpmay.com. To contact me for questions or to schedule me for a speaking engagement, email me at ron@ronaldpmay.com. Also, be sure to check out all my other videos on my YouTube channel at World War II History and Stories with Ron May. You will find a link to my videos on the YouTube tab from the homepage of my website. Please consider liking and subscribing to my channel. Thanks for tuning into this episode. Please share it with others who you think may be interested. See you next month for our episode 21, featuring the events and stories of September 1945 on World War II at 80.